Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. We are once again going live with Dan. We are going to continue going through Terraform. Today, we are moving beyond our resource groups and onto something slightly more advanced. So, Dan, I'm gonna switch over here and let you pop on and be live as well.
Cool.
Welcome back.
Hello.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone.
Thanks for coming back. So
Yeah.
I know you and I had talked, and we've got a bit of a backlog. What was next on the docket for today?
Yeah, I was just trying to bring up DevOps here to look at our board. Last time we were talking a lot about resource groups and all that sort of thing, and we sort of dived into Terraform, kind of getting used to it. So if you check out that stream, from last time, that'll help you to get started. And today, I think that what we wanted to do was try to finish up this sprint. We've got a sprint called Slightly Stupid. That's for me. That's one of my favorite bands. All of these sprints are named after bands. I couldn't think of anything, so I was like, oh, bands.
Hey, at least you have a
Um,
good naming scheme. I approve.
thank you. So, what did I do? Did I just whack my, I was perfectly set up there.
Control Shift T. Control Shift T.
Control Shift T.
Oh no.
I whacked it. Oh well, let's try that again. Oops. Oh look, direct URI, straight to the sprint. Swing. Look at that.
It's
That
like
was
it knows
cool.
where you're wanting to go.
Or knows where I was, right? So yeah, we resolved and closed all of our stories for resource groups, and as you remember, we kind of have this 101, 201, 301 sort of thing.
Yep.
When the 101 is basic, 201 is, like we use locals and variables, and 301 is like a shared module. And so the whole idea of this, I just did it again. I don't know what I'm doing. What am I doing?
Whatever
It's interrupting.
keyboard shortcut that is, stop using it.
Well, it's Zoom it, but Zoom it isn't running, and that's why
Ah.
it's killing me. Okay, so apparently, if you press Control and 1 or Control and 2, it goes to different tabs
Oh
in your
yes.
browser or something.
Yes. Yes, it does.
Well, I'm
You're
used to
used to
always
that.
having Zoom it on, so that's why. Okay. So anyway, so we've got the rest of these features that are a part of this first sprint. So basically, we've got a VNet, an NSG, a public IP address, a NIC, and a VM. And the idea here was to write each one of these and then obviously have kind of a quick start at the end that is a virtual machine, right? Because we know we need all of these. So yeah, like I want to just jam on these. We've got VNets are next. So I say we just dive in. What do you think?
I approve. VNet
Let's
time it
write,
is.
let's write code. Oh, look, I already had it on active, so I guess I was excited. All right, so there we go. So VNet 101. All right, so let's jump over into Writer. That's what I
Yep.
use to write the code. Um, and I made this a little bit bigger, so hopefully people can see it. So in our repo, this is the Terraform-kung-fu repo that's out on the Build 5.9's um, GitHub page. We have an Azure folder because obviously this stuff is Azure. Hopefully we'll have more stuff later. We've got quick starts, which are kind of these real easy things, and then we have templates. So I'm going to add another directory here for VNet. Sounds good, right?
Yep.
Like kind of these short names for these. And then before we had the 101, so let's just add a couple more directories. So 101. And obviously we'll need 201 and 301 too. So this first one, again, is going to be kind of the hard-coded version, right?
Yep.
So I guess one thing we need to think about will be, I guess we need to have kind of a simple IP scheme, to use, right?
Yeah, we're gonna need it. That was gonna be my next question: is what do we want in terms of, say, subnet, cider ranges, that sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe just bringing up something here to help me think. Um, I mean, people usually use 10 dot and that sort of thing.
Right. For the old school people, Class A IP address, private
Class
IP address
A.
range.
Yeah, exactly. So we definitely want to use one of the private schemes. So 172.16 is also one.
Ooh,
So
class B. There's
why don't we
another
go,
cool one.
yeah, let's go somewhere where people don't go. Why
Okay.
not, right? Just for the sake of doing it. So we'll do /16 because I think that's the technical,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that the right one? So let's do that. So if we said that our VNet address space, which is like the thing that all the addresses come from, is that, and then um, what do you want to create? Maybe like 2 subnets, 4 subnets? What do you think?
I'm thinking maybe just two, because once you get
Just 2?
beyond one, um, I think the difference between two and n
Doesn't
is
make much difference, yeah.
yeah. I think two just to show the difference between one,
Yeah.
and then you're probably fine.
Okay. So then if we did like, what should we call subnet 1? Like app or something like that? Like pretend like it has an app in it?
Yeah, was the intent to build this up eventually for um, like VMs to get dumped in this and whatnot at some point?
Yeah, I think so later, right? Like when in the next sprint, I think we have some stuff that's like, load balancer and things like that. So it might be kind of cool to have like an app VNet and then maybe data or DB, APDB. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I was almost imagining more of like an ops level one, right, where it's
Apps and data.
sure, yeah, that works.
Right? So like, this might have like a Windows VM, this has got a SQL server, or this is like an Nginx VM, and this is like a MySQL, or, I don't know, something generic, because later down the line, it would be cool to be able to use these generically with, other VMs, right? So let's say this one's going to look like 172.16.1.0/24. Oh, cool.
Looks good to me.
Like you said, there might be other things later, but that's fine. I mean, we can do this, so that makes it easy. That gives us something to work back from, right?
Yep.
All right, cool. So if we go back and look at our pattern we had before, for the one-on-ones, we just had one file, right?
Yeah, we kept everything together, very simple and straightforward.
Right. And if we looked at what we did there, we had our little thing
Yeah,
at the
you can grab
top,
your
and
header. Yeah, and you can even grab the provider too,
yeah,
because
so we'll use that. Okay, cool. So pretty easy, right?
yep,
We've got version 2 and up. And then we've got our features block we have to have, and then we'll just leave this here in case people want to, code in their subscription and tenant and that sort of thing.
yep,
But, this part of it is pretty easy, right? So that's the first part, right? And then obviously we're doing a VNet, right?
yep.
So I guess we need a resource block, right? And actually, my ID must be listening to me because it was the first one there. Must have
That's
been the
the
last.
creepy level of the JetBrains products is
It's actually reading your brain.
right. It is listening to you in predictive IntelliSense based upon what it hears.
So in our name before, we used something like B59s underscore. Do you think that's wise still to have this sort of thing? Or which, let's see,
Yeah, I guess
B59.
it depends on what we're building. If ultimately we're going to build this out like that, I have no problem with it. In general, I don't know if I would say like include org information in the ID, but
Yeah,
I mean without it, there's the question comes, what are we building, right? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, somebody could change this to be anything they wanted,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and I
Um,
think right now what we're building out is something that matches for it.
yep. And then we have this underscore, which is a convention I think we wanted to stick with, right? So not dashes, underscores. So we sort of match the other view.
Yeah,
Um,
and the preference for underscores literally comes from the idea if you double click the ID, it'll
mm,
highlight the whole thing. Whereas if you do a hyphen, that's considered a word break character.
mm. Good point.
It is a very tiny level optimization, just to be clear.
Yeah, that's cool though.
So yeah, if you double click on VNet, you'll note it stops at the hyphen initially,
Yeah, that's interesting.
whereas the
Yeah,
underscore it won't.
very nice. Okay.
Again, minor preference there.
Now, one thing to note, we do need a resource group here, right? I
Correct.
mean, if this is going to run by itself, we do need a resource group. So we almost have to steal
Yes. Yeah, and
this.
I sort of imagine that a lot of these initial ones, until we get to like putting things together, we are going to be just somewhat
Stealing.
copy pasta across.
Yeah. And it's important to note that, like, obviously, as we get down the road here, copy pasta bad, right? Like, it
Yes.
makes sense for what we're doing here. But yeah, that's something that is kind of frowned upon. I mean, right? We always want to
Yeah.
reuse wherever we can. So,
Reuse where we can, though it is important to note with Terraform, sometimes copy pasta is actually the right answer. So
fair enough.
like in programming, there's the concept of always keep your code dry, do not repeat yourself.
Yep.
But it's important to note whether two things match because they should be shared or it's just coincidental and they really should be separate, right? The
Yeah.
question should always be will I ever need to rev this by itself?
Yeah.
So, and in some cases the answer is yes, and you really don't want a shared bit of code for those situations.
Yep. Paul Stack says that we need to do this for Pulumi next. Well, when we're done with Terraform, we'll do Pulumi next for infrastructure as code. Okay. You'll like that because you could write it on C sharp, right? You're
See,
in C
that
sharp.
sounds great to me.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, cool. So next we have our address space, right? And we said before we were gonna like hard code these values,
Yep.
right? That's kind of what we're doing. So I'm gonna pull that class B that I had over in my notes that we just talked about. And remember, this address space is the top level space for the virtual network. So all the addresses have to be, or the subnets have to be carved out of this, if you will, or subnetted, right?
Correct. Yeah, and it's
Okay.
worth noting you are going to have to wrap that in quotes because
Oh yeah,
that
sorry.
value
Yep.
there
Yep.
is
Yep.
an effective string.
Yep. So that has to be in quotes. Yep.
Yeah,
And it
and
did.
and for what it's worth, the square bases around it do indicate that that is a list of address spaces, so you could theoretically have more than one.
That is a good call. And that might actually be really great for later when we get into more complicated ones, right?
Yep.
Like, I think you need to have a comma there, don't you, to
Yep.
do that?
Comma, and
So,
then you can put in whatever else
yeah,
you want.
we could do something like this, right? But we're not doing that here. We're doing the
Yeah,
simple
this is what
version.
this is 101. We're keeping it simple.
That's right. We're keeping it first, but that's a good point though. It is a list, and even in Azure, you could just like go into the portal and add another address space if you want to,
Yep.
which is really nice in case you run out of IPs or something, right? So in this location, we need to reference um, probably where the resource group is, don't you think? Or how should we
Yeah,
view
I
this
mean, so
location?
there's nothing that says that your VNet has to be in the same location as your resource group, though
True.
it probably makes more sense, right?
Yep.
And if we're going with the hard coded approach, just East US2. Yeah.
Cool. But that is a good point. Like you can have a resource group with resources all over
Yeah.
the cloud you're in, right? So like if we're in Azure Commercial Cloud, it would only be there. You can't like cross clouds. You can't have a resource group in Azure Commercial and then have a VNet, let's say like an Azure Government or Azure Germany or something weird like that, right?
Right.
Okay,
And then the
so
hard part,
here,
picking a name.
yes. So going with the B59s is sort of what not that, 59s. And then typically with the names though, we do the dashes, right? Like instead of the underscores. So
Yeah, that's just the naming convention that we picked, and obviously pick your own favorite naming convention. But it's important
okay.
that you have a naming convention and stick to it. And I'm not
Yep.
overly picky at that point, as long as it's sane.
Exactly. Now in this particular one, we're saying B59's VNet. Maybe should we put
We
the
could.
location in the name? Or is that bad?
Uh,
East US2. We could do that.
we
I
could.
mean, this is a preference thing, right? Like, obviously, there's metadata of where it is, right? But then there's also the ease of reading things, although I don't know if this is easy to read. right?
Yeah, well, the other consideration too is if somebody was ever to use this to scale out, right, across multiple locations,
Mhm.
some resources do need to have unique names, and so
Yep.
sometimes doing that just to disambiguate, here's the one that's on east, here's the one that's on central, right? Those types of
Mhm.
things.
Yep.
Sometimes actually is not just a preference, but you got to disambiguate and a requirement at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I would expect that when we maybe scale out our 301 later, we
Yeah.
probably would want to include the idea or the concept that we have multiple in multiple regions, right? I think that that's a good idea with our shared module. So
Okay, so let's leave it there then, just for the idea
let's,
that we're going to prep later. I don't
yep,
think VNets, I don't believe, are ones that need unique names.
no,
So,
true. Things like, anything that has a unique DNS name always has to have that uniqueness to it, right?
yeah.
Like
So,
storage accounts and things like that.
yeah, storage accounts, key vaults, etc. Okay,
Yep.
and so I think
Yeah.
here we're going to do like what we did above and hard code the name in to match. Because
Okay.
well, I guess I'll ask you. We could reference the one from above, but I'm wondering if that lines up more with the 201 where we start bringing in the variables, right? The
Well, let's
101s.
reference it here. Let's reference it here. I think maybe.
Okay.
I mean, having one reference to learn, I think, is a good thing, right?
Yep.
So we've got that,
Yep.
right? So that's the resource provider, and then the IntelliSense finds that we have that RG, and then we need the name. So there's a bunch of things that are exposed here, right?
Yep.
Provider ID, location,
And actually, it'll be
connection.
convenient if we do this. So what's going to happen by doing a variable reference here is Terraform now knows that there's a dependency between this VNet and that resource group. Because when Terraform doesn't think a resource has any dependencies left to build, it's just going to kick it off and start running. So I kind of wonder if there would have been a timing problem if we just hard coded it there, where it's going to try to create the resource group and the VNet simultaneously.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's we always call that like a race condition, right? Isn't that kind of how
yeah,
we refer to it, right? Like, and that's a good point in the sense that by doing this here, we are telling Terraform specifically, you can't create the VNet until the resource group is alive because that's the one I want to be in, right?
right. Yeah. So having something like this that does effectively the implicit dependency, you can do
Yep.
explicit dependencies. There's a meta level depends upon or depends on attribute you can set on there. For the cases where maybe there is no implicit dependency to be had.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we would, where would we do that? I've never done one of those, to be honest with you, like that. I always, sort of leverage the fact that it does that here.
Yeah, so generally we would do it. So this is a meta level property, so it exists on all your resources. So we would do it
Got
above
it.
the other ones. I'm sorry, I keep using the word property. Attribute.
That's
Attribute. I will fix my words.
that's okay.
But it's just depends on, and then it takes in a list,
Hmm.
and then you feed it the IDs of the resources. Yeah, so there's your depends on.
So we
And
would just do
so,
that,
yeah.
right?
So you tell it very explicitly, I am dependent upon this other thing. Make sure the other thing is good to go before you try to do anything with me.
Yeah. So another great example of this would be like a virtual machine. You could say, well, it depends on the NIC, right? The NIC has to be there. It depends on, and then the NIC could have a depends on to a public IP address, right? You have to have the public IP created so you can reference that when you create your NIC, and then you have to have those two things are there before you do the VM. And because it's a list, we could just add another one, right?
Yep.
Of course, I don't have one here, but
Yeah.
anyway, we
Well,
don't need
and
this
most of the
because.
time on those, you're passing IDs around, and so it ends up
Mhm.
like you're going to end up with a lot of implicit dependencies. So most of that gets handled for you. Depends on is a little bit more of a rare case where you've done something with like
Yeah.
scripting or ARM templates or similar, where it's like, no, trust me, this thing's being created. Hold on real quick. I'll let
Yeah.
you know.
Yep. That's good though. It's a good call out. So, all right. Well, we've got.
Here's the first one. So let's
So let's
make it be a real thing.
so let's format it first. Do that. Cool. And I guess we can do a validate on it. Why not? Oh, did not load the plugin.
Terraform
I
init
need
first.
to init Terraform init So remember, we're doing all these just in the folder. We're not using a backend or anything.
Yep.
That's kind of an issue to deal with. Make sure our get ignore file is set up. So yeah, we're good to go here. So now we can do a validate on this and just see what the provider says. Hey, it looks good. So let's
We didn't
plan it.
typo anything. And if you want to, you could just kick straight to an apply too.
Oh yeah, I
Because
guess
the
that's
apply
true.
will do a plan. Just
Yeah,
don't set the auto approve flag.
exactly. All right, so let's see if we get a quick plan. All right, so
One
this is
resource
good.
group, one VNet.
Okay, so that looks good. Now, what's interesting about this though is that we didn't build any subnets though, right?
No,
So
we can. You want to go add
yeah,
them back in real quick?
yeah, we will definitely do that. What's interesting to note is that what's interesting about like using the portal or something, the portal will kind of walk you through this and say, hey, you've got to create some subnets too, but you can create a VNet with no subnets in it,
That
right?
is totally valid.
So, but that looks good. So next thing we need to do is add subnets, right?
Yes, but they are not going to be a separate resource.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this is there's like two different ways to do this, right?
Yeah, well, I guess that is a good point. You could either do the subnets in line or you could do them separately.
Yeah, I was going to try to find.
So yeah, if you pull the...
So this is a resource called Azure RM Subnet, right?
Yep.
Let's find the network resources first. So let's find virtual network and read what it says about virtual networks. Virtual network. So Azure RM virtual network. So there's two different ways to do this, right? We should probably make this a best practice to look at this before we start writing the code too, right?
I did put the link to it in the
Did you? Okay,
the
great.
Twitch chat.
Okay, cool. So here, an example we've got. This is kind of like what we did. We didn't, get into the DNS servers or some of these other things, but you can do a subnet in line.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, the quick and dirty approach.
So we can do that, right? Like that would work. Where we were to just say, like, I can even steal this code from them, maybe. I can do subnet, and then I could do a prefix, and we said like 172.16.0.0/24, and we could give it a name. I think we called it apps, right?
Yep.
In our little cheat sheet here. Then we have data, which is .1. So I just make another one of these.
Yeah, and if we want to go quick and dirty, this is by far the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is good for the 101 sample. That wouldn't be such a bad thing, would it? Okay. So that's now the other way. Maybe we'll do in the 201 where we create the other resource. What do you think?
Yeah, that's fine. Switch it over and start breaking it out.
Yeah.
The only disadvantage that's worth knowing about is the stuff that's in line directly in there. Order matters a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, what do you think? Think we should?
I'm fine with the inline one.
Yeah, I think so
Largely
too.
stealing from HashiCorp in their own docs or I guess the Azure ARM provider in their docs. They did this for their VNet example because they seem to think that that's the easiest way to convey a VNet.
Yep.
So.
All right, so let's run a plan real quick. But yeah, you're right. Like it even has it as the example, right? Whoop, I went to the wrong page. Yikes. Go away, traffic manager, search on
Yeah,
Bing.
and there is that big scary warning right at the very top that calls out, do not mix and match.
Gotcha. Was that on the other page? It was.
No, yeah, that warning right there where it currently allows to either do standalone subnet resources or defined inline.
Yep. So you can't do both, right?
Yes. Well, if you do both, it is fraught with peril, and one gets to override the other. So don't do that.
Yeah. So this is the breakout way. We'll do it later, where we actually have a different resource. And the interesting thing about this one is the virtual network name will be a reference,
Yep.
right, back to the other piece, whereas what we're doing is just using the real basic version. So what you say that again, you said that these like in order, right? Like they'll just sort of read down this and create them in order.
Yeah, because ultimately Terraform is going to have a list of its subnets that go with this VNet. So if you were to hypothetically just go through and reorder those, it's going to want to redo those subnets for you.
Got it.
So that's the one of the few things with the inline stuff that's like, well, like it's great for quick and dirty work.
Yep. Well, and by the way, if you look at their sample they're talking about here, they're sure showing you this kind of like what our 101 is, right? They've got a resource group.
Yeah,
Then
and
they have
they
they
do
have
forward the
other things.
location too through as well, right? Like that's because both the
Oh yeah, yeah, you're
resource
right.
group name, so they do rather than coding
The
the
hard code.
location in both places, they definitely bring it forward.
Well, I guess we could do that. Maybe we'll just leave it the way it is. Okay, so here's our plan. I was running that while we were talking. So we've got a resource group. We've got our address space declared. A couple of things like the ID, it doesn't exist yet, so we'll know it after it's applied. And then same thing for our two subnets, correct?
Yep.
Okay, that's cool. And you see the security group, that would be a network security group, right? Which we
Yes.
don't have yet.
Yeah. No NSGs yet. I think
And
you
we're
have
gonna
that in another PBI to work.
Yep, and it'll be interesting when we get to those. How are we going to make this work? So we're going to have to figure out in the samples how we're going to make this work because you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But we'll come
It's
back to that.
yeah. There's gonna be a little copy pasta to make all these work.
Yep. All right, cool. So that's good to go. So we have a plan. I guess in theory we should do an apply, shouldn't we?
We
Maybe.
should because the plan just guarantees valid Terraform syntax. The apply means that Azure likes it too.
Yep. So let's see what was this resource group. It's B59's East US2-RG. Let's see if I already have one of those. Because I might, because we were making lots of resource groups. Yeah, there's a bunch of resource groups here. So it was this one. So let's just kill this. I was messing around with importing stuff yesterday or the other day um, from all of our, various tests and things that we were doing.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have everything destroyed, and I was playing with that because I figured it might be good. It's weird. Things like one of the things I find with like Terraform is that there's not a lot of like even the examples are a little wonky, and then maybe it's because there's so many providers. Like I can't always find like exactly what I'm looking for. Even it's like yesterday I was like I just want an example of a Terraform space import space. What are the next two things that I need to do to get a resource group into my state file and match a config that I wrote for it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, that's probably a blog that I'll do to help people when we have these examples.
Yes. I know several people who keep just a templated version of that command sitting around somewhere so that they can replace because getting those parameters backwards occurs more often
Oh,
than I'd like to admit.
exactly. So Terraform apply, what is it? Auto approve?
Yep.
Approve.
I
It's
think it's
auto,
hyphen approve. Yeah.
right? That'll save me from typing. By the
Oh.
way, that's more characters than yes, just FYI. So,
That's why you're supposed to up arrow enter.
oh, well, there's that. Well, I hadn't done it yet, so I'll do it later. I'll use that for the rest of our time. Okay, so resource group is creating. That's cool. And then
Yeah, you'll note it didn't
to close
start
that off.
creating the VNet until after the resource group says creation complete.
Exactly, right? Ah, sweet.
Huzzah! We have
So
a
that's
VNet.
cool. So that's pretty fast, right? So let's go and where's our resource group? It's so interesting. Like, I don't know, maybe a year ago, the portal started being slow. I don't know what they did. It's just because it's become so fancy, but this drives me
Delayed
crazy.
consistency or similar.
Yeah, I don't know. Is this like Cosmos DB or something? Is giving me my eventually
Yeah, or eventual
Consistent?
consistency. That I think is
Event-
the correct terminology.
Yeah.
This is
I'm
the part
sure.
where you start questioning what account your terminal was pointed at.
Oh yeah, that's right. That is true. I didn't even look. Oh, good point. Okay, AV account list. That showed table. Oh, it's the right one.
Okay. Well,
That's my sponsorship account. So
yeah.
any day now, Mr. Portal. Wow, this is crazy. Let's do AZ group list -o table and see if I see the group. It's there. The VNet list -o table. I don't know if it'll show them all or not, or I need to research.
You
Oh, it's
also probably don't
network.
do hyphen table.
Need network. There it is. Okay, well, it's there.
It's there.
Just
Portal just be
Por-
slow.
Portal needs a cup of coffee this morning. Hey, there it goes. Okay, so got the right name here. Got the right name here. Let me jack up the font just a smidge so you can see it. And so we've got ECS2. We've got our address space, right? That's nice. Shows us the range. And
What's that
then
warning there about?
that's probably I have
Oh,
another resource group, or I have another VNet that overlaps this in my subscription.
got it.
Microsoft gives you these nice warnings. They're trying to be friendly to you. And then subnets. So we've got data and apps, right? Interesting how they're like out of order. I wonder why that is. That's funny. Just how Azure
Yeah,
created it.
that could have just been the ordering of it there.
Yeah. So that's the basic thing. This was one of the key things that you could also pass, where you could set a DNS server. It was in here. Is it the right one? Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it. DNS servers.
So if you had specific servers, and again, this is a list, right? So, um, multiple of this if you had your own server. So that's the basics. So that's 101. Cool.
Yep.
All right. That didn't take too long.
Yeah.
Right.
So
let's look at 202.
well, commit first.
Okay, that's a decent idea.
Let's not lose our work just yet.
That's fair. Let's find Terraform-kung-fu. Terraform-kung-fu. Okay. So got a bunch of staged files.
Yeah, you've got one in the RG. So do you want to hit tree view on your get cracking there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so expand that guy out. So the fact that we've got so many changes in RG is interesting to me.
I must not have committed these before or something.
Or you ran a format and it added a bunch of trailing.
Yeah, it looks like I did that.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to include all of those? I guess is the question.
Looks like it, yeah, because like this, I just didn't commit these. So I guess I could unstage the VNet one, right?
Well, or you can just stage all the other ones.
Yeah, I guess
if you're wanting to take them all anyway.
Yeah, I'll take them all. We'll be a little bit cleaner on that in the future, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could have stage commit if we want to separate those out into individual commits to.
That's all right. Okay.
I will point out we are also on your RG's branch still, so at some point we got to pull request that beast back into master.
Yeah, I figured I'd pull a requested after we did today. I didn't clean up all the notes. That's why I didn't do a PR yet. Kind of lazy.
Okay.
So yeah, I need to update all the notes in the top of the RG files and maybe add some comments and stuff like that. So
got it. Okay.
All right.
201. So
201.
So we could start with the same main TF like what we had before. Now
main.
expand out our 201 before, because before this is where we brought in variables,
Providers.
wasn't it?
Yeah, we had variables, outputs, and providers. So we kind of.
So go ahead and build up all the things real quick, because we're probably going to want, our outputs TF. We'll want our vars TF. We'll want our providers TF.
providers.
This is one of those areas where I've occasionally gone through and used templates to build out a bunch of stuff. I don't know how to do them in writer stuff. I assume they probably support it, but
yeah, that's a good call.
Because this general pattern of I create a new Terraform folder, I want all the things.
Yep, makes sense. So our main,
starts with basically a local. So let's go through and do that.
So let's copy this over into here.
Yeah.
So we've got a local of an RG.
Yeah, I don't think we wanted to have the word test in it, but we can.
Yeah, I don't know why that was there.
That was probably just an example from last week, I imagine.
And we just committed that, so yay me. Okay, I'll have to go back and clean that up. Oh well, that's fine. Okay, so local RG.
One more backspace.
Yep.
And then let's go through and let's put location in here too.
Okay.
Well, I guess doesn't matter. No, I guess we don't.
What did we do? Did we do that as a var before? Oh, we did it as a variable.
That's why. Okay, well let's keep with our pattern then and do location as a var.
So we'll load that up. That'll be.
And let's change the description real quick. I don't know if you want to say for the resources or whatnot, because it's going to be for more than just the resource group. Right? This is where we're going to put all the stuffs.
Makes sense.
Okay, and then you can probably, I suspect, the provider's TF, you could probably take wholesale, because that should just be the Azure RM provider.
Yep.
Yeah, so that we can take wholesale.
So save that guy. Don't need that one. This is from there. Okay, so this is the VNet vars. Yep. Let's get this. Okay, VNet. Don't need that. VNet. Okay, these are all VNet files now.
Yep.
Okay, so
and
we've got our main. So the providers we're done with. We don't even have to do anything here.
Yep.
We're good to go on this one.
And so this leads us into our first choice, is before we put our resource group in RG's TF, right? And we can stick with that pattern and do an RG TF and a VNet TF or similar, right? And effectively break apart our resources that way. And this comes down to the question of how do we want to organize this effective Terraform module or folder, right? Do we want everything separated out? Some people like having it all sitting next to each other. The only drawback with the everything sitting next to each other in one file is that doesn't scale far out, but we don't have a very big thing. Because we could just do a VNet TF and put the resource group inside of it and argue that, or we could do something more like maybe a networking TF, right? And this is going to be everything to support networking, right? So we'll put the VNets and subnets and kind of group all of our related stuff together under it.
So looking at our 202, which is really a 201, in a way, we broke it out as an RG here, like as a file.
Yep.
So I almost think that maybe we should have an RG.
An RGTF and a VNet TF or similar?
An RGTF and then a VNet TF.
Okay. If we're going to do a VNet TF, I think let's keep with the inline subnets for this and wait to separate them out until later.
Okay.
I think. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a subnets TF here in a second as well, which is fine. But the moment we do that, I almost think that because VNets and subnets are so tightly coupled, I almost like keeping them together in a file.
Yeah, I mean,
and then
I think
changing
that even
the name
with
of the file.
Yeah, I mean, like it doesn't bother me. I'm with you. I think that subnets are just really so integral to a VNet that it's okay to have them in the same file.
Okay. Like we could break them out, and that the only reason why I argue changing the name is if I see VNets TF, I expect I'm only finding a VNet in there. But with that said, because subnets can be declared in line, Is it that big of a difference between having them as separate resources versus inline?
So what would you advocate to call it then? Like what would
Something around
network or
networking
something?
or similar.
Because it has what you're saying is that by having the exact name there, you expect to open that file and only see that resource provider in it, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's okay. I mean, I'm okay with that. All right. So then the local in main,
Yeah.
like this needs to move, right? Because wouldn't the local.
No, before we just reused it. Because the whole idea with your locals is that you've got a shared variable that can go across multiple things,
Oh, that's fair. Okay. Yeah. No, you're
right?
right.
And you
Okay.
can get the same thing with your vars, but the whole point of the 201 was to show the difference between local variables and input variables.
Yeah. Okay. So RG name. I don't really like this.
Mm.
Is that what we do?
Yep. Well, so if we're doing variables, let's go full tilt on it.
Yeah.
So
Fair enough.
do the hyphen curly brace and
Oh
left
yeah,
shift.
that's right. I forget we had the variables here. Okay.
Yeah, well, let's actually do that because that's probably a good thing to introduce, right? So go back to your main TF and let's actually reference the location variable. So, um, yeah, but I think we want to put that in the middle, don't we?
Yeah. Sorry. Like this, hyphen, and then var dot
Location.
location.
Yep, and yeah,
Don't
drop your
need the
two.
two. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So now what we're saying is we've got this. I guess we'll save a prefix for the next one. Do we have a? How did we do the RG here? See, we had a local prefix here too in the 201.
That's 202.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I guess we can save that for.
Yeah, I mean, we could combine them, right? If we want, because 202, what we did is we added in the idea of counts. And I don't know
Yeah.
if we necessarily need to go full tilt on that one here, maybe.
No.
I mean, we could do I guess we could go really fancy with counts on the subnets if we wanted to.
Um.
But do we want to?
Decisions. Okay. So.
Yeah, so I mean, we could easily
Here we
go
go.
through and do something like that, right? Where we go, because we could do this 201 where we break it apart and start doing it, but I don't know if we necessarily want to reintroduce that concept on all of these until it makes
No.
sense.
Yeah.
It complicates the code, and I don't know for a lot of benefit, right?
Fair.
Especially if the intent is to show somebody VNet.
So we've got a location. Yeah. I mean. Let's leave it like this.
Okay. So your network TF, I think we go and we poach from your main TF on the 101, right?
Yep. But we're going to remove this subnet in line,
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, you're going to remove the provider above it, you're going to remove the resource group above it, and then
Yep.
we'll flip out the inline ones.
This, we'll pull the resource group. We definitely don't need a provider because you can only declare a provider once, right? It doesn't like this anymore, right? So we need to fix this reference.
Yep. So go to your RGTF and let's take a look. Oh, it's because there is no RG there.
There's no RG here.
So let's go and poach that real quick. For some reason, I thought we had already done it. You can just poach it off your 101 if you want. Or I guess if you want to grab the variable one. You can do it.
Yeah, probably the 201 version, right?
Yeah.
Like this one? See, here we had a var.location.
Yeah, because in the 201 we did location as a single variable rather than as a list.
Yep. Gotta get the header. Okay. So var.location we have, and then RG name we have declared in main, right?
Yep.
Which also has the location in the name. This is an interpolation of that string that's declared there.
Correct.
So this is going to find its way to here, which is actually going to express itself using this, right?
Correct.
Coolio. So now we can go back here and look, it lit back up. But it only lit back up because we're kind of using the same names all over the place.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, because it's still called B59's RG. It magically finds it.
Yep.
Okay,
so let's make this a little prettier, don't you think? Like we should probably have a couple things that are local here, right? Like we don't want this hard-coded.
Yeah, so what we probably want to do, so go ahead and grab that name for your VNet. And let's go back, and I think let's go and actually do the same sort of prefix thing in our main TF like what we did before. So drop the RG off the end of that, and let's call that, let's change this thing from like RG name to prefix. Because what I'm imagining we do is this guy can just contain the B59's hyphen location hyphen blank, and then all the other ones can be responsible for tacking on either RG or VNet or whatever else is necessary, right?
Yeah. So we'd add another local here, right?
We could either do it local here or we could just use prefix elsewhere, right? So on like RGTF, we'll go and change that out to be prefix. And you'll have to go back to the interpolated string again, because we'll want to append a hyphen RG on the end of this.
Too many files open.
Yeah, you're looking for either RGTF or network TF. Yeah, so that guy there, you can do the $ curly brace and reference that local.
So local prefix.
Yep, and then just at the end we'll do VNet.
Yeah.
So you've got two hyphens there because we ended prefix with a hyphen. Yeah, so I guess the question is, do you want it to end in a hyphen? Either one is fine. Whatever way looks best to you.
I kind of like to put a string where I'm putting it rather than, you know what I mean?
Yep. No, that is totally fine. And then we need to do a similar change in our GTF.
Yep.
So he can now be responsible for.
But we need to make this a string now, right?
Yeah. Well, make it an interpolation.
Well, but you have to put a string there, right? Correct?
Yes. Technically, it was still a string because local prefix is a string.
That's fair.
But now we want to combine stuff together. So we got to switch to the new Terraform 12e syntax, which I can't say new anymore since they released 13.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Something like that.
Coolio.
Okay. So now we've got a common naming scheme that's going to be present through everything. Great.
Yeah, so what we've adopted is that any name basically is going to have an interpolation that calls that local. That local is in main because we're using this across multiple files.
Yep.
And that's kind of an important thing that I struggle to remind myself all the time with, is that if you declare a local that you're going to use across multiple files in this folder, you should do it in main. If you declare a local that you're only going to use in that file, you should declare it in the file, correct?
Yeah, that's sort of the convention we've been working with. And the only rationale is because a lot of tooling doesn't always jump you to the location. Needing to know where to find it is important. So yeah.
But it is helpful too to recognize, like, from like I don't know, maintainability, right? Especially on a team, or even yourself when you go back to a set of code you haven't seen in a while, if you see a local in like the top of this network file, you can say to yourself, well, these locals are only probably used here, right?
Right.
Whereas if you find a set of locals in main, you're saying, okay, these locals could be used in all of the files, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's sort of left up to you to try to track down where those are.
Which is, it just, to me, it makes more sense. I mean, when you kind of showed me that, I was like, okay, I think I get it, right? Because when you have hundreds and hundreds of Terraform files, it can get really confusing. What's coming from where to where, right? You feel like you're a rat in a maze trying to figure out where you're going.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so in the network here, we've got our address space, we've got a location, so we should probably.
So yeah, I would say that location needs to swap. We can do var.location there, right? To make sure that
Yep.
it's all the same.
Location. And what you were saying is in 12, you used to have to put that in quotes still, right?
Yeah, well,
Well,
pre
312.
V12, you had to put it in quotes. Now you can just do it straight. The only time you have to do the whole quotey syntax is when you want to do interpolation and
Yeah,
append
like one of
stuff or
those.
whatnot.
Yep. Okay, so are you okay with this address space just still being like that? I think I kind of am. I don't
Yeah,
know.
the only so here's the thing. If we go through and make the VNet separate or the subnet separate resources, we might want to get fancy with like our Cider range functions
Yep.
to derive them rather than doing it there. And the moment we start doing that, we should probably move that Cider range for the address space into a local.
I
That's
think
my
we
only
should.
thought.
I think we should.
So,
So if I said VNet address space,
mhm.
right? And then if I steal this, here, should I lose those quotes? Leave it like that.
Well, you're still gonna have to do local VNet address space there, right?
Yeah, I was wondering if I can do this. I can do local.vnet address space. Okay.
Not without putting it in the square braces,
Yeah,
because
that's what I was.
yeah,
That's what I
because
was.
address space itself is a list, and your
So yeah,
local is itself a
still got to
string.
have the list. So yeah, so that's interesting though. Like between these two. So this is a list of strings, right?
Hmm. And it's largely all governed by.
Does this also need to be a list up here? Like, is this supposed to be like this?
It doesn't. So if you make it a list up here, then you would drop the square braces down on 24.
So maybe that's a better way to do it.
Well, so yes and no. The only reason I would say make it a list down on 24 rather than up on your local is
Mm-hmm.
because if we're going to use that local to calculate the subnet cider ranges, it's
Ah,
probably cleaner if it's already just a single scalar value rather than
yeah.
having to break apart a list.
That's interesting. That doesn't work in the IDE. Okay. Okay. This is the first time I've seen Rider be annoying. That was a little annoying. Okay. But that needs to be. So usually, what I can do is I can do this and then just like that. Yeah, there it goes. Okay.
Just
All
needs
right.
a little bit of magic.
I guess that was funky. Okay, so that makes sense though, right? So we knew address space was a list because you get multiple values there.
Yep.
It's hard code, it has to be a list from Terraform. Um, Location, this is a string that's coming from our var files that we filled out. And then we're using an interpolation of that prefix that we created for everything. So we have prefixes everywhere now. And then we're obviously picking up that resource group name to pass through when you create this, because everything has to be created in the resource group. Now, the next thing we said we were going to do is we need two subnets, right?
Yep. So we're going to grab
And
the
so,
subnet resource there.
and so we removed the hard-coded kind of JSON string text, right?
Yep.
And we're going to do Azure RM underscore subnet, right?
Yep. And then I think we were calling it app and data or similar.
Yep. So
So
this first one would be apps, I think is what we called it.
yeah, I'd advocate for lowercase. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'd probably also advocate for underscore subnet on the name as well.
Ooh. In front of it or behind it? Subnet underscore apps.
I'd put it on the end
Apps.
because most of the other ones, what we've done on our other naming scheme is the type is underscore and some representation of the type. So B59's VNet.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Like up here, yeah, we had that. We had what it was on the back end on the
Yeah,
trail.
we haven't been overly consistent, but
I wonder if that's bad. You know, like maybe VNet underscore.
I mean it's a little bit redundant because you're going to have the type on any reference inside of your provider name.
Yeah, that's okay.
Again, to each his own. But
Yep.
yeah, here's where you would do apps, right, in all caps for the name.
Yeah, to make it look the same. Yep.
Yep.
And then the resource group name is going to reference the same as above, right? So it's the same as this because it's obviously in the same resource group.
Yep. Because please don't put your subnet somewhere else. That just starts
Yep.
to look weird.
Yep. And the virtual network name, the IDE should help us here, right?
Yep.
Cool.
And then here you pretty assuredly want to set one more thing of address prefixes.
Exactly. Which again, this is a list string.
Yep. And this is where you got to feed it some cider. So here's where we could get fancy, right? Like we could go through exactly what we did before and hard code it. Or we could use the built-in function for Cider subnet and have some fun.
Yeah, I think that maybe we should do that. So me and you have hashed this out many times together.
Yes.
Right? And one of the things that you might want to grab this, or can I put this URL here? I'll put it in my chat to you and you can put it out on the stream. But that's this is the little Cider function thing that we built, right? To just tell us what these look like, right?
Yep. Because oftentimes managing your ciders is a pain in the neck.
Exactly. So we built this little tester, right? And so let's talk about this Cider subnet. So what does this thing do? It does what for us?
So I dropped a link in the chat, and I'll put it to you as well for the function link, right?
This one.
Yeah,
Yep.
that guy there. So this is one of those functions that's incredibly powerful and awesome, but it requires
Also
your head.
maddening.
Yeah, it requires your head to think in binary,
Yep. Yep.
which is for network engineers makes perfect sense. For
Yep.
some of us, makes our head spin.
Mm-hmm.
Hence the little Terraform example of I just want to look at what this does. But the short version is you can feed it a VNet's address space in its Cider notation, and then effectively give it some offsets to say, go ahead and calculate what this subnet would be at this particular offset. That way, if your VNet's address space changes, your subnets adjust accordingly. Now, obviously, you could always pick a different address space for your VNet that would probably invalidate this, right? You could, all of a sudden make it smaller or something, right? And blow up all your previous calculations. But in general, that doesn't happen a lot. And at least this would give you some indication of if you've done that. So
Yeah,
some amount of sanity checking rather than waiting until it goes to Azure and Azure whacking you upside the head and saying, your subnet doesn't fit in that range.
yeah.
What's wrong with you?
You know what? Yeah, I think that the place where we've really found this very useful is like, Kevin and I have been working on a project for a couple of years together, and how many VNets do you think we have?
A lot.
Like 80 or something ridiculous, right?
A big number.
And imagine so you have 80 of those, and each one of those VNets has at least two subnets, right? Like, and most of them have more like four subnets.
5, 6.
And we have some that have as many as 10 subnets, right? Like hub subnets, right? That have like lots of firewalls and all kinds of things.
Yep.
And so, the beauty about this is you can sort of figure it out once, especially if you have a pattern, and then you can follow that pattern, and you don't have all these hard-coded, this, right? Like you don't have this everywhere.
Yeah. You
Do not repeat yourself, right? And in
well,
a weird way, what's interesting is that this is a different kind of do not repeat yourself. It's like do not repeat yourself, do not hard code something when you have a way to use like a function. I think this is the first function we've used in our samples too, right? I don't know if we maybe length and a couple others, but
yeah, we've used length for the count one previously. You're right on
yeah.
that.
But still, this is pretty cool, right?
Yeah, and there's like that page that you're on that left side. There's a bunch of functions that Terraform has built in for you for
Yep. Yep.
all of your common stuff that you might want to do.
Yep. But this is a really good example of one that is a little quirky when you first learn it, but then once you learn it, you're like, oh, thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
I would always, I do all the networking stuff, so I feed Kevin and say, okay, here's 40 VNet names with their address spaces and their subnets, and then you pretty quickly you're just like, oh, well, I don't even have to see the other parts of the spreadsheet. Like imagine hard coding all these in, and that's fraught with mistakes, right?
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
there's no reason. I mean, this is definitely one of those places where you go, oh man, that's a /27 instead of a /24. We're out of IP addresses. How long's this been out there? I don't know, 2-3 years, right? Um, and the important thing to note from an Azure perspective, by the way, on this, is that an address space, right, on a VNet, if we look at like that VNet that we just created a few minutes ago, you can change portal.azure.com. You can change the address. Whoop, that's the wrong dang. Hold on, let's.
Too many accounts, Dad. Too many accounts.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, let's switch to this one. You can change the address space on a VNet. Okay, so the address space, remember, that's the giant Cider range at the top. Like I can go into here and where this says /16, like I could make that /8, right? Like Azure will allow me to do this. I can go in here, say /8, click save. Well, it doesn't like that Cider block, but you get what I mean. Like you can
Right.
change that as long as it is reasonable. Like we could make it a /20. Let's go down. Right. So I can it's let me save it. Okay. What you cannot change is, well, let me say this right. You can change the Cider of a subnet if there's nothing deployed, right?
Yes.
Okay, so like I could change this to a /27 because there's no VMs in it. But the second you put a VM in it, you can't change the Cider range. Okay, so that's a really big deal. Okay, especially if you have like 20 VMs or something, or
Yes.
100 VMs. I mean, like you're really stuck, right? So if we looked at this Cider function, right, and let me bring up that. Where did that gist or whatever it was that I wrote go on this? No, we don't need that.
Because we were gonna target going from that /16 to a /20. Was that the
Yes.
which is
Well,
which is actually convenient because I think that's their exact sample in the docs.
is it?
Yeah.
That's fine.
How convenient.
Yeah. So let's look back at our little tester here real quick.
Yeah.
So our little tester, what we do is we just declare a local and then we
tweak the numbers.
tweak the numbers to see what they look like, right? So we could actually take this.
Yep. So go and throw that into some TF file in some folder. I don't care where, but
So let's call this cider test.tf. Maybe in a different folder. Maybe we should put it in a different folder.
If you put it in a different folder, you'll need to declare providers and whatnot.
Yeah,
just make sure the syntax on your other files isn't like broken yet.
I don't think it was. We can validate it. But so here we have, if we did our 172.16.0.0, did we have a 16? Is that what we did? We just
I think that's where we were at. And then we wanted to go to
16.
Then we wanted the end result to be the /20 on the end, right? That was the.
I think we're gonna do /24. So each one of these should be a /24, right?
Okay, so if each of those, so the Cider subnet range, that second parameter there. So the first one's easy. It's your prefix or your VNet Cider. The next one is the change to your Cider range, the thing after the slash. So if we want to go from 16 to 24, those 4s need to become 8s, I believe.
Yep. Well, let's run it like this and see what it shows us, and then
Sure.
we can learn from it. So we've got this file. What's the best way to run this? Because I got a bunch of other stuff here. Right?
Yeah, the problem is the bunch of other stuff, because normally you just run a Terraform apply.
Maybe we should just move this file for simplicity's sake.
Move the file. Yeah, move the file or comment out something else.
And we'll need a provider block, right?
We won't. We won't actually need a provider block, because that little Cider test TF, you'll note, is not using any providers. It's just using the base Terraform functionality. So you don't need if you don't use any providers, which is a little weird in most cases, right? You don't actually need a provider block until you reference a resource inside of one of the providers.
Let's make this a quick start called Cider Tester. How about that?
Sounds great.
Except it was supposed to be a directory, not that. Cider Tester. And let's create a file called cider test.tf. We'll just pop this in here, and then we'll just have ourselves another little quick sample.
Sweet. We got an extra sample out of that.
Woohoo! Make sure I write a story, okay? Okay, so
separate commit and all that jazz. So yeah, so back yourself up into that other guy.
It should be quick start. So quick start, Cider tester.
Yep.
Okay, so there's the file.
And then just straight up Terraform apply, because ultimately what we're looking to see is the output variables. What? Oh, yeah.
So look at that.
So we went from a /16 to a /20. And then more importantly, the harder one is that net number of it figuring out where it should be. What the network
number is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Like it did the math for us, which is really cool. So if we look back at this, the first one is the Cider, right?
Yeah.
And then the second one is the next number, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you notice here, a quick thing is you see the /16.
Mm-hmm.
If you add that number to that first value,
yep,
that's going to tell you what it'll end up as.
Yep. So right? that one gets the first one's the.
That'll help you with the math. So for example, if you say, well, I know I need a /20,
mm-hmm.
you can add this plus whatever the first is, and then you'll get that, right? Because, of course, 16 plus 4 is 20, which is what came spit out of there, right? So if we needed the 24, right, we would do 24 minus 16, so that's the 8 that you were talking about, right? And then what happens is when, let's talk about this one, right?
Yeah, the more interesting one.
The more interesting one. And we can run it real quick. We can save this. If we run it again, well, I typed yes before, that's why. If you can see the outputs that it's going to generate. So now it's showing us.
Yeah, it's going to shift it over and adjust so that we have the appropriate number of subnets, because it'll figure out that if the first subnet on with a /24 is only going to effectively need that last octet, so the thing after the last period worth of IP addresses. So the first one after that would be a 1 dot, and it goes through and does all your binary math for you, which is great. It just requires your head to think in binary.
Exactly. The reason why it's saying a change here is because I had applied before, right?
Yeah,
that's why
it's perfect. Yeah, because from Terraform's perspective, it's doing work. Now, the work that it's doing is updating its state file with new outputs, but it is doing
math for us, right? So it is doing work, and it did actually do that. When you do the apply, it's going to update the state file to show this, right?
Yep.
But this is an awesome little thing. So now we know what this needs to look like. It's 8081, right?
Yep. So if we go back to our other one, we can then just plug that in.
Let's get rid of this. So let's go back down to
You
here.
yeah, you want to get rid of that guy.
I'll delete this.
As much fun as it would be to include him.
We need to write a blog on that little thing we just did too. That would help a lot of people, I bet.
That has definitely been my cheater way of dealing with all of our VNets and subnets.
Yeah, that was excellent. I remember when you showed me that, and I was like, huzzah, as you always say, right? I was like, yes, this is awesome. I got to write this and put it in my GitHub so I can use it from now on. Okay, cool. So we've got the address space.
Yep.
Right.
Oh, I would go down to 34 where we've got the subnet, right? And I would probably just say we just put the function right in line here.
So Cider subnet.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and so the first
that
one's
was the one we were using, correct? Remember, guys? So Cider.
Yep.
Subnet, and then we'll reference that Cider, right? And then we'll put those other values,
yep.
right? So network. So our network then is the address space rather would be a local, right? Because it's in the top of this file.
Yep.
So that gives us that first part of the function, and you see how it loads it up for us. So we need an 8.
Writer.
Yep. And we need a 0.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah, and I think we can copy and paste this subnet and just tweak everywhere where you see app to be data. Yep. And then change that 0 to a 1 on the function call. And I think that's it.
Yep. Data.
And we start to scale out very rapidly.
Yep. Now, this is cool. For the human brain, it's great for the code, but for the human brain, a little bit harder again, right?
Yeah.
Like if someone says, "Hey,"
though.
Oh yeah, thank you. If someone says like, "Hey, what Cider or what Cider will those subnets be?" Remember, that one's easy. It's the address-based Cider range plus this first numeric, right? And if someone says, "Well, what's the other network going to actually be?" That one's a little bit harder in your brain, right?
Correct.
Here it's easy because it's literally the first one and the second one, and it's one network up, so it's a little easy for network folks, but like
for example, it's harder when those numbers aren't multiples of 8.
Exactly. Well, and if we go back here, like imagine, this was an 8. These don't have to be the same thing, right? Like this could be a 6.
Correct. And then my head starts to hurt because now I have to start thinking in binary and
exactly. So like we can do that again. I can do the apply, and then look, you see how we have, very different, the two are different, which is, probably more likely, right?
Unfortunately.
But maybe not. So it just sort of depends. But, obviously I'm going to fix that. But, so anyway, coolio. So let's get rid of that. Let's go back to our network. I'm going to fix. Oh, no, I didn't change it there.
You did fix it. And I think think we're good. Run the apply.
So
let's see what it does.
Let's see what it does. Well, we didn't do any outputs.
All right. We should look. I guess the question is, what do we want output for this?
I'm gonna close all these files because we got a million files open here.
So,
101.
Because previously, I think we just output the ID of the resource group, didn't we?
Yeah.
So then, I guess the question is, what outputs would we want from this? Because outputs at the root level are not typically horribly useful, right? They're mostly there for you to see. They could be, if somebody else uses your state file as an input, they can be helpful there as well. And so mostly this was to expose the idea of outputs for the upcoming modules.
Yep. Well, I mean, VNet ID might be good, right?
Yep, I could see that being helpful. We could even output things like subnets, right? Like
and the subnets also, I think, would also be helpful because they definitely could be referenceable, right?
Yep.
So we would probably call this VNet ID, and then the value is going to be the ID that's created, right? for us. So it would be like Azure underscore like that, and then we'll leverage the IDE, and it's going to give us the ID, right?
Yes.
So this would give us the ID. So if we had some other thing that needed to reference this ID, like for example a nick, that would be good, right?
Yep.
And then I need to do another one of these to get the
Yep.
subnets. So subnet underscore apps.
Well, we could do all the subnets just in one.
Okay.
I guess it
So
depends on how you want to do it, right? Like this is an output, so we could literally put in whatever we wanted here, right? So if you wanted to do this as a list, you just do the square braces
yep.
and then comma separate out all of your subnets in here, right? You don't even need the quotes. You can just
Cool.
boom.
Nice. All right. That's
Yep.
good.
Yep. Your Terraform format will clean it up, but normally you put a space after the comma.
Yeah. Well, I'm lazy. I've gotten so used to that format cleaning up things for me, which is a good thing because I'm messy and riddled with typos, as everyone will tell you.
You're in the wrong directory.
Ugh, I am. Template. I don't like that. Templates. That's 201, right?
Yep.
Format to make them pretty.
Make it all look nice.
And maybe.
Terraform apply.
So, well, but we can't do that. We need to go back to our 101 folder and destroy.
Oh, you're right.
Because. And it's probably going to puke on that too because I changed that. Oh, maybe not. I don't know.
So I
We'll see.
don't think it's going to, because the IDs of the items are going to be the same. So it's worth knowing that when Terraform does a refresh, or when it goes to do its plans, it's not looking at your actual infrastructure. It's looking at its state file and comparing that to your scripts. So
Let me ask you a question. So if I would have ran a plan, it would have then just said everything's the same, correct?
correct.
Which is wrong.
Correct.
If I ran an apply, would it overwrite with the config from the state file?
It wouldn't have known to apply those deltas. It didn't know that they were
Ex-
there. So
exactly.
the other command that you would use would be something like a Terraform refresh to say, go actually out and let's check what our infrastructure really is, so that we can then have effectively an updated state file, right? But
Got
it's
it.
important. The reason those commands are separated is because refreshing from infrastructure can be kind of slow at times, right? Like there's a bit of work that goes into actually going out to Azure and querying every single thing to know what its current properties are and whatnot. So in general, you want your Terraform plan and applies to be fast.
Yep.
But if you've got people modifying your infrastructure outside of Terraform, that's when you quickly get into problems. So some people will go through and have a Terraform refresh before they do their plans every time, especially in like a pipeline. That way, when you're actually doing your plan, you're going against what currently is.
Yeah. Well, like you said, though, that could make your pipeline really slow, right? Like if you have hundreds and hundreds of of
Yeah,
resources,
it
can
it
make your
it
pipeline
starts to
slow.
add up. Now, obviously, each individual request tends to be fast, but yeah, you start factoring in how many thingies you have to go and refresh, and that gets big.
Yep. Okay,
So
so
new resource group, that looks correct to me.
yeah, because we just destroyed what was there before. We've got a subnet called apps with the 0.0/24. It's going to be a part of that VNet. Then we've got our data subnet. It's going to be in those things. It's going to have this name. I always find this weird to me when I read this stuff because it's like the plan is upside down, right? Like it showed the resource group first, which yeah, that makes sense. But to me, it's like, wouldn't it create this,
Yeah, and
then create these?
it does know the implicit order too,
Yep.
right? Like it can figure
Mhm.
that out.
What's funny is like it's just an ordering thing. If you think about it the way that like PowerShell works, it's actually in your code procedurally would be that way because you would design your VNet or your subnet configs. You'd have to declare those first,
Mm,
and then they're in memory, and you pull them to like inject them into you basically write them up as variables, right? That you then
right.
pass with the command to create the VNet. So in a weird way, that kind of reads like the way a PowerShell script would be written, which is kind of interesting too.
Yeah. And so you can see there too that it did know the correct order to create them, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
RG went first, then the VNet, and then you see it start creating both of the subnets simultaneously.
Yep. It's funny. It also outputted the subnets first,
Yeah.
which is interesting, right? Like, if we go back and look at what the outputs, the way we wrote them, we wrote this first, and then we wrote that.
Yeah, that is
So
true.
it's
I'm
kind of
wondering if it
fascinating how it
alphabetized
did
them.
that. Oh, that's interesting.
That's the
I don't
only
know.
rationale I can
Maybe.
come up with for that is that S comes before V.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna get fancy.
So if we type Terraform Graph, right? What do we see here?
Ah. So
We've
now we get
got
to actually look at how Terraform effectively views the dependencies through all of these.
got
So
it. Resource group first.
yeah, resource group first. But this actually gets fairly detailed into this, right? Because you'll note that you'll also see things like the resource group isn't just listed once, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's figuring out I create this thing, it has the following label, right? And then you get down a little bit further, I think it's 7 lines, 8 lines, and you see the resource group again, where now it's evaluating inside of that. So it's now figuring out local prefix, we need to expand this. And so ultimately when you do a Terraform validate, this is the type of stuff that it's going through and validating, is making sure that the references between all of these things work, that you don't have any, say, circular references between things,
Yep.
because ultimately it needs to be able to evaluate all of these each step of the way. So
Fascinating.
yeah, in like programmer compiler terms, this would be like your syntax tree, so
Mm-hmm.
AST or similar,
Mm-hmm.
and effectively building out what those relationships are between each individual item in the syntax.
I think you're right. Like, look here. It's like it's output dot subnet ID, output dot vnet ID. So it doesn't care how they were declared. That's not important to it. It just alphabetizes them.
Yeah, it's mostly concerned. Terraform's mostly concerned with the dependency relationship between resources rather than anything
Yep.
else, because
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
affects the order in which things can be evaluated and then effectively done.
You could also, you know, this is the thing we were talking about the other day about the people that we write code with that are, anal about
Alphabetizing,
the alphabetizing. To me, this makes no sense. How would I output what the subnet is when I haven't outputted what the VNet ID is, right?
right?
Um, because I'm writing it from my Azure perspective of knowing that. Like to me, this seems more natural, but obviously,
Well, and in the at the end of the day, it doesn't matter a whole lot. So
yeah.
because
Hmm.
the HCL is a what is that? It is proper JSON. So
Yep.
it ultimately, because JSON doesn't care which order those things are declared in,
Yep.
they can ultimately come out in any order. And if somebody were to reference it by, say, using your state file as an input, it would effectively do the same thing.
Yep. 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 Well,
Okay,
cool. So we probably can try to
crank out the module fairly quick.
crank out the module fairly quickly here.
Okay. Do you want to commit the 201 stuff before we get too carried away?
Yeah, let's do that.
And then run the Terraform destroy real fast.
Yep. So hold on for just a second.
Yeah.
I've got like a puppy emergency. I'll be right back, Kevin.
No problem. I will talk and fill the time for the moment.
Thank you.
So,
I appreciate that. Maybe take the screen share for a second.
yeah. So ultimately, what's going to end up happening is the previous one on the 301, and let's see. I think I can pull this guy up. The 301 before, we went through and started doing submodules. So inside of Terraform, the module references are basically the foundational building block for reusing your Terraform code. So from Terraform's perspective, the effective scope of everything is per directory. So you organize your code effectively into different folders. So for people who are used to, like me with C#, where my namespaces usually follow the directory structure, this kind of makes good sense because, hey, I understand that something's reusable if it's inside of the same namespace. And so it's very similar to that. So ultimately what we're going to do is pull this VNet into its own reusable module to demonstrate the module reuse. Now, when we did it with resource groups, it was probably the easiest thing possible because we've sort of been building up our examples going through here with the expectation that it's about to go into a submodule. The key difference is typically inside of your shared modules, you would not put a provider's TF. So where we had declared like our Azure RM provider, usually your providers are going to be declared up at the root of wherever you're working, with all of the subfolders effectively just using whatever providers are already there and declared. So there are some exceptions to that, especially when you get fancy with some of the different providers. I know like the examples we've used before is like the Kubernetes providers or the Helm providers, where you have to do something fancy, or maybe a provider needs to be initialized later because you don't have all of the data. Like the Kubernetes provider, oftentimes if you're spinning up a cluster, you'll have to wait until the cluster stood up before you can get the config to effectively connect into it. So that's going to be the direction that we're headed there. And I think I hear Dan coming back, which is like
I'm
perfect
back.
timing.
I'm sorry.
That was perfect timing. I was quickly running out of material.
I'm sorry about that. You know, I have a new puppy, and like I think 90 minutes of hanging out with me in my office is all he could take, and I'm so proud of him that he actually wanted to go to the bathroom. So I was like, feet don't fail me now. Okay, so we're gonna check in two things here, right? We're gonna check in the 201s because those look good, and the Cider tester. So how about that?
Cool.
So we'll stage all our changes, right? So we'll do VNet 201 and the Cider tester. That was bonus, right?
Extra points.
Very cool. Very nice. Okay. So we're going to commit those. All right. So thinking about this, and I could hear you talking. So
excellent. So you know everything I said about you.
I don't know exactly everything because I was kind of so far away that I was starting to get like, you started to sound like Mr. Roboto for a minute.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yes, that's right. So we need to do, and we have a bit of a juncture here, right? Where, you know, if we look at the 301, what we did is we had, you know, our RG, right, where we were basically calling the module, right? And we had our providers, TF. And of course, we're going to need to do these sorts of things, right?
Yep.
And we had a module. Now, the module here obviously had RG before.
Yep.
So the one of the challenges that we're going to have right now, and something that we're going to have to determine how we're going to do this, is we still need an RG, right? And I'm going to do a destroy really quick too, as you told me to do. I need to destroy one stuff. Whoop. I have to spell it right. Destroy.
Yeah, we're gonna have to figure out how much of Do we want to reuse our RG module, or do we want to do something different?
Yeah, right. Because and maybe we do, right? Like maybe we need to copy this down. I don't know. Like how would we reference this? Because the way that we're doing this is a little hard, right?
Yeah, my gut reaction says we went to all of that effort to make a reusable RG module. Let's just copy the sucker down and use it.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
I mean, that's
So what we
my
would end
initial
up
gut.
with
Yeah.
here is like we would like if we show this in Explorer, it might be easier to just do an Explorer. I would basically take the RG folder out of the
Yeah, out of
RG
the RG
templates
ones and go back.
and put it in 301 and modules here, right?
Yep. Because if we've
So
done
that
our
will
job
bring that
correctly
up.
with a nice reusable module, it should be reusable.
Exactly. And then we need the reference to it here, right? Or
Yep.
no? Oh yeah, we need that because we can call that. Oh, we might as well steal the providers
Yeah, and the
while we're
provider
here.
TF we can leech.
So VNet, so that's going to go here at the root.
Yep.
And then we're going to need a new network one. Of course, we have to write the module.
Yep.
Right.
Or a VNet one, I guess, is the other way to do it.
Yep. So now if we come back to writer here, this should update for us. Whoop. Let's minimize some of this other stuff because we don't need it anymore.
Yep. And I think what we should be able to do is for the contents of your other for the contents of that VNet module, we can probably do what we did before and largely just steal the contents of the 201 folder.
Mm-hmm.
Now we'll need to clean some of it up because we won't want things like the resource group in there, right? And we won't want things like
Basically what you're saying is all of this except
all of
for that
that
state file.
Yeah, we don't want the state file, and then we'll end up deleting a little bit more because you also won't want your provider's TF and whatnot in there.
Yeah, so let's just take vars, output, network, and main.
Yep, that'll make up the
That'll make it
we're
easy.
after.
And we'll put that in the VNet module folder.
Yep.
And we'll start with the cleanup there.
That sounds like a plan.
Give it a second to find the files, which it did.
Ba-boom.
And it went green because I just set a second ago to automatically add it to get those files. That's why they're green. When they were red, they weren't referenced in get yet.
Okay, so that gets us a good start there. So I think the first thing we're going to need to do, so go into your networks TF, right? So the first thing that we're going to need, like we're already passing in location, but before we were trying to reference a resource group name, we are going to need to add a new input variable for resource group name.
Got it.
That is going to be a thing that we need. And I would propose on our vars TF, we make it non-optional. Say very explicitly, if you call us, we kind of are going to need to know where you want me to go.
Yep. So in the vars of the module, right? We're going to say, I don't like this too. We're going to have to update that, but that's okay. So this should probably be, well, should it be at the top or should it be?
Depends. How much do you like alphabetizing?
Should I like alphabetizing? I mean,
I don't know. In my mind, with a small number of variables, it doesn't matter. The only time it helps is when you open up one of these things and arguably it points to a refactor and you see like 30 of them. It's like,
yeah, and they're all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to be RG, right? RG.
Yeah, RG or resource group name or similar, right? I like having the bit name on there because RG is a little ambiguous of do you want my ID, do you want my name?
Yeah.
And in our case, we know that we want the name. So we'll just be very explicit about saying, please give me a resource group name, nothing else.
What did we say? No, we didn't have that here.
Yeah, we didn't have.
So we're using the RG like in the names.
Yeah, but if you look at the attribute on our 201 example, what we did is we did rg.name for the oh, that's the RG one. If you look at the 201 sample on VNet, sorry.
No.
Yeah, so on like network TF, right, is in here, the only thing that we actually pulled off of that RG is rg.name.
Got it, yeah.
Which is the big reason why I would say that we want to be explicit about saying that's the name that we're looking to pull in.
Makes sense. Okay, so on the network, that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Right?
So this now is going to change.
So we need to do this var. So we need to
Yep.
do this var, right?
And it's going to be, it'll be just a string again because nice and simple.
String.
And then no default because we're going to make it.
Yeah.
We're going to make it required, and then you could put a description of the name of the resource group for all the networking resources, I guess. Great. So now back where we had all those red bits in our network TF, we can then go and fix those. As we now have, we can now use our var for all of that.
Var dot resource underscore group name. Find a replace on this, but whatever. It's only a couple places.
Great. So that pulls that out, which is wonderful.
So we're going to pass that string in.
Yep.
I'm going to turn on my do not disturb so I don't get pop-ups, but okay, whatever.
I think that only works against the notification settings, not against
Teams.
I
know. Not against Teams.
Okay, so I think that actually gives us
Teams.
I think that gives us everything that we actually need for this module, right?
Well, let's take a look at it. So main, we're still using the same prefix. So one thing we didn't do is we didn't really make this like multi-region. If we
No, we
wanted to
didn't.
do
We could
multiple.
Well, so the thing being though, the module itself doesn't need to have multiple locations, right? We could invoke the module multiple times.
True.
So maybe we get the first invocation done, and then if we want to show scaling out twice, we just invoke it twice.
I would say that it would be better to change this to a list.
Okay.
So the location, right? So instead of just an individual string, we would do a list of strings, right?
Yep. And then that needs to change its default to have square braces around it.
Just did it again. I don't know why that doesn't work. And whoops. You should be able to do this. That works. Weird. Okay, never mind. And then we could do like central and east if we wanted to, right?
Correct.
Now, we're not going to do that right now, but you could do that, right?
Correct, but now we do have to go change our resources now to use count properties. Because we can no longer just do var dot location, right?
Yeah.
We have to account for all the locations.
But that's okay, because we could just do a count of one, or we could do a count of multiple. But is that bad though here? Like if you like using.
So it depends on how you're going to control your multiple regions, and in general, I think invoking the module multiple times is probably cleaner because it gives you a little bit more control over how many times you do this. Now, it does
Yeah.
depend on exactly what you're building and the context in which you're building it. So
Yeah. I
hard
see
to
what you're
say.
saying. Like you would have, like if you keep it the way it was, where it's just a list or it's just a string,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then instead of having, because we are going to have to invoke this out here,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like
And if
at
you
the
look at
modules level, we're going to have to
yeah.
do network or VNet. I don't know
Yeah,
what we're going to
VNet
call
TF. Just by convention, usually if you're going to reference a module, we name it matching it. So
it. It's
I
kind of like
think your
this.
VNet TF is at the wrong level. It should be at the same level as that RG. All the way up to the 301 level.
There we go.
Yeah. So, and if you look at how we did the RGTF, right? Oh yeah, that ain't gonna fly. We're gonna have to give it more than one location. And maybe we change up this version of the RG module a little bit to not take in all of the locations. But yes. So you'll do something like, I don't know, VNet, right?
Yep.
We may want to give it a more descriptive name in a moment, but then the most important thing is to give it a reference to the folder so it knows where this module is located. So I think it's going to be, just ./modules /VNet. And then it's probably unhappy because now it knows that it's missing required values because we said that we had some required stuff. So I imagine that's probably what those squiggly lines. Yeah, so
that's
it wants a
nice.
resource group name. Great. That's exactly what we want. So this is going to be the first point where we can actually start combining the outputs of one module as the inputs to another, right? Because that's ultimately what we're going to do.
Yeah, which this is a really important thing, right?
Yeah, because this is where you start actually putting together all the Legos.
Especially with the resource group, right? Because that one's going to be everywhere.
Yeah,
right?
so let's go to our RG module real quick and let's clean that up, I think, a little bit. So let's look at its vars and its outputs. So right now this guy's taking in a list of locations, and I'm wondering if that's the wisest thing to do or if we just literally take in a single location and we'll invoke this any number of times that we want. So if I want one in central and east, I will call this module twice.
So we would convert this to just a simple list. We would
I think it'd be a
remove.
simple string, but yes.
Sorry, a simple string. Excuse me. String. We would call it over once, where we put in the value here as single, right? Then in the RG for this.
Yeah, you drop the count, and so we don't need the count attribute at all anymore, and our location then just becomes var.location. I don't know if we dropped the S yet on the name, but we should. Yeah. And then
right?
And then our outputs are probably the only other thing to change. Because we no longer, so resource group ID.
We don't need a
we do
splat
that.
anymore.
Now, the other thing we probably we're going to need our name, right? Because ultimately we don't want just the ID for our other module. So you're going to want a second output here. Not just a second value, but a whole second output block. Because ultimately, from this module, we need the name of the resource group. Now, we could probably do some magical divining of it because we know how that works, but we don't like that. We want to be fairly agnostic and let this module tell us what the name is that it's selected.
Makes sense. So we'll get the ID and the name because we need it in two places. We need the name to be able to reference that in our variable, right?
Yep. And the ID we're technically not going to use, I don't think, unless we want to spit it out somewhere.
But there might be other places later where you would,
yeah.
Right? Do you recommend like at least name and ID as an output for any module? It just seems like
in general, at minimum ID, usually usually I always look at what is this thing creating and who might need to reference it, right? So if it's and a lot of it's driven by like the Azure RM provider of, hey, do your other stuff take in the thing's ID or the name when it goes to reference it, right? So that's usually the key thing that drives what your outputs are.
Tags could be an interesting one here too. I could see somebody saying, I just want to adopt all the tags for whatever's in this resource group.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Which is kind of interesting, right? Because you could just say, basically,
just inherit all the way down.
Inherit it all the way down. Like you could grab that stuff, it outputs as a bunch of tags, and then you could pull it in, which is kind of cool, right? Because it would minimize the amount of code that you have, and you could just say, well, we just wrote something about tags, didn't we, together?
Yeah. Well, and more importantly, once you pull these things into an output, you can then, append to them and manipulate them before sending them in somewhere else if you want to. So it's not just a fixed thing.
Yeah, or have other locals or something that you do other interpolations with. There's all kinds of cool things you could do, right?
Yeah. So let's go through on our RGTF now. Let's up at the top of our 301 module, and let's get that guy cleaned up.
Up here.
Yeah, so this guy now takes in location, right? So we should change that, and then let's actually rename this module from RG. Let's demonstrate multi-region. So let's do like RG East and Central or something, right? So create two of these module references, I guess, is the key point here.
So one file, but two references.
Two references, yeah, is what I'm suggesting that we do here.
That makes sense. So East.
Yeah, and then so give it a location because it needs one. And then, copy pasta that whole module block, and we will do a second one. And so this is effectively, like I said, the difference between when should you use a list versus when should you just invoke it twice. And the other thing that's, I guess, worth considering is how, is this going to be an expanding list? And usually I think regions are probably not something that expand too often. Like usually people know, how many regions are you going to deploy into? And so so if you need another region, simply copying like a top level module reference isn't that complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got both of those. Great. So now let's go to our VNet TF. And we're going to use those guys. Okay, so we've got that. So now we need resource group name, right? So let's change this guy's name too to do like Central and East 2, like what you did on the other ones, because we're going to make a VNet in each, right?
Yeah, as well. So,
I think you were doing suffixes on the other ones, weren't you?
Was that?
I thought so.
I thought it was the other one.
RG underscore. So
this is backwards the way some of the other things were. So yeah. So it would be VNet Central. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and then this guy is going to need the resource group name, right? So, yes. So he takes in resource group name, and then here what you're going to end up doing is just like how we were able to reference other Azure RM resources, we can do modules the same way. So you'd lead with module dot.
Module dot. And then
you see Central US there. And then you should see RG underscore name. Poof. And so that will pull the name out of the other module and use it as the input to this module.
Yeah. So what's interesting is like when you're writing the code, like what you just saw us do, the nice IntelliSense of module dot blah blah blah, all that showing up is actually there because we first declared the module, over in here.
Correct.
Right? Like if that didn't exist, that stuff wouldn't be all pretty, and the IDE wouldn't be able to find it real easy with tab completion and stuff, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, you can write it the other way. It just would go ugly, right?
Yeah, like you just got to do it. You just got to keep it all memorized in your head.
Yeah. Right? Like if I do this, fugly, right? Because it's commented out now, right? Back, it's party. So now we need another.
Yeah.
VNet.
Now you can do the east side. And then it looked like we had one more bit of cleanup to go do. Thought I saw an error, but
East US 2. Uh-oh.
You got an extra US on the end of your 2.
Oh. There we go. So those look good. Now,
no, I thought I saw an error still in our RG module from when we changed off the count. Could be wrong. Yeah, we got so that needs to, so that just needs to be var.location because we
had locations before. Because when we wrote the original RG module, right?
Yeah, we were passing in a collection of them. So
we were showing how you do a multi-region sort of thing by declaring it and using a list of strings, right?
Yep.
Whereas here we are invoking the module multiple times. So the module actually is a little simpler, right? And we're calling it multiple times to give us that multi-region, right?
Yeah, and again, I think the general guidance I would put forward is list for when things need to be dynamic and scale out, and just invoke multiple times when it's a fairly consistent list, right? Like the number of regions I'm going to deploy into is probably a pretty consistent list that I imagine is not scaling dynamically. Maybe yours is, but in general, I imagine it's probably fairly well fixed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So
let's run it. I mean, if we've done our job, it should quote unquote just work. I hope.
No, I didn't do this destroy. I need to do this destroy really fast in that other one.
Yes.
On the 201. So, okay. So what we've done basically today then is we've created the really simple VNet 101. We created the more complex 201 example, right? With multiple files, with outputs, and then obviously we've jumped in with the shared module here. But the important thing to note is that we needed some changes to our RG shared module, and quite frankly, we need them in that module folder, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other thing to say though is that we could have referenced, like in here, this reference is something we made, right?
Yeah.
Like that module up in RG up here, we could have.
Yeah, you could make that a relative path that
as long as it can see the files.
whack.
Yeah, as long as it can see the files, you can do that. Which way down the line we might talk about versioning of modules and things like that. But you can definitely put all different kinds of ways to reference that sort of thing, whether it's here. And the other thing about modules is that this is just a file path, but you can use a get path, correct, to a module?
Yeah, you can use a variety of different ways of getting to it. I know on our other project we've used Git. I've seen other people do like SSH as well to be able to reach across to grab it. That way you don't necessarily need your modules in the same directory structure directly, right? It can pull them down. Now it's still, when you do that in init, it is going to go and make sure that it can resolve all of those references, right? So you'll note initializing modules. So when Terraform runs that init, it wants to be able to get all those modules. So if you say have a module referenced on an SSH path, right, and it's unable to resolve that, your Terraform init's just going to blow up right out the gate.
Makes sense. And that's the one thing that's complicated about doing that sort of thing is the auth piece for that, right?
Yeah.
Like having the correct, if you're talking about SSH, well, then I need like a key. Where's that key going to be? Is it secure? Blah, 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 that sort of thing.
Yeah, it starts to add a lot of complexity to your setup really quick.
Yeah. Something like that.
Terraform has an A in it.
It does? I'm getting tired. Okay, so there's that. Let's do a plan just to see what this looks like.
See, we've done way too good where we haven't typoed anything and the plans just work every time. We should really do a demo where our plans fail.
Our plans fail.
See, this is just way too easy. It looks like it works right every time. Normally, the workflow is plan, oh, go fix that error. Plan, go fix that error.
Well, it is helpful when you have two people looking at it too.
That is helpful. So let's see, two resource groups, central and east. Location and names look correct.
Nice.
So
now there's definitely a problem here.
The fact that we've got two VNets on the exact same Cider ranges.
Exactly. Exactly. Right?
Yep.
Now it works, right? Like Terraform is saying, like here, we've got.
Well, the plans have worked, right?
What I mean? Well, actually, this is a little wonky here
yeah.
too.
So hold on, we got an issue. We've got virtual network name going into because we didn't. So we didn't pass a location to our VNet module. So it's everything's going to east. See?
So we've got two problems, right?
Yep. Our VNet module is not scaling well.
Let's close all these files because we got so many files open. It's kind of confusing about what's what here. So I'm gonna close all these because I had them saved. So we've got two problems. We've got duplicate Cider ranges, which overlapping Cider ranges, like we couldn't peer these two together, for example, right?
Right.
And then, yeah, they were all in the same location, right? Like that was the other problem.
Yeah, right. So I think one, let's check our VNet module because I think we made location optional, and it's probably just a matter of specifying location. Right, so let's check our vars and see if location is a variable that comes in. It is a location. So we just need to pass a location. So right now our location is optional to make it easy for the module to be invoked, but the problem is we need to set it, at least on the central one.
So this says far.location. So that's coming from here.
Yep.
Right.
And we didn't specify it when we invoked this module, so everything's just grabbing east US2. And maybe we should not have a default and force everyone to specify.
Right. Because what would happen here is these will not break, right?
Yeah, those are now broken.
See this? So let's see.
So now we have to pass a location.
This is one thing I like about this IDE. You see this?
Yeah.
Where it tells you why it's broken, right? And it actually Alt-Shift-Enter. Alt-Shift.
Boom.
That. Cool, huh?
Now it's like, fill this in, pretty please. I need one of these.
Yep. Alt-Shift-Enter. I don't know why it's doing that. Did it the first time. That was weird. Okay. Anyway, so now this should be what?
Well, so that's a good question, right? So let's look at our RGs I think we just hard coded those in, right? But I'm wondering if maybe what we should do is move that location into. So a couple choices. The simplest would be we just move those locations into a couple locals, right? So we have my central location and my east location, right? And then we just pass that local into both of these modules in each case. Right? That would be one option. The other option is we could also expose location as an output and then feed it through again. I don't know if I have a strong preference.
So you're saying
I guess the question is what is the expectation? Do we always want the VNets to follow the resource group's location?
No.
So if that's the case, then I would say let's declare local, because if you use it as an output from the module, you're explicitly saying that it is going to always follow. And if you want to be a little bit more in control of it, I would say let's just make a main TF here.
See, that to me is the type of thing that codes me into a refactoring later, right? If for some reason I'm not going to follow that mode anymore, then I'd have to refactor.
Correct.
Right? So that would be, I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, and so this is one of those cases where sometimes dry is not the right answer, right? It's important to understand the context in which these variables and the kind of coupling. So when you see, references in your Terraform that's a dot between two things, and know that you're coupling those together. And the question should always be, should those be?
So if we said something like primary location?
Yeah. Set it up that way. That sounds great.
Right. Secondary.
So if you want to switch up like your region pair or whatever,
Yeah.
it gets easy.
You do something like that, right?
Yep.
And then this becomes local dot primary, and this becomes local dot secondary.
Yep. And then we should go and do the same thing over on the other side as well. If I'm pretty sure you got those backwards. This is the east is our secondary.
What I get for copying and pasting instead of just typing, you know what I mean? Location local dot secondary.
There. So that should address that problem. And then you wanted to address the issue of the duplicated cider ranges, right?
Yeah, then we have duplicated cider ranges.
So let's go to our VNet module, and then let's pull the cider range out of a local, and rather than a VNet address space, let's actually make an input variable for it. That way it can be controlled from the outside.
Got it. So we're gonna steal this. We're gonna delete this.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll have a var where we say variable VNet underscore address underscore space. Or is that too many words?
No, that seems fine. Like, yeah, I guess VNet's a little superfluous given that we're inside of a VNet module.
Yep.
Yeah, it's probably clear enough. String here.
Well, it's a list though, right?
No, well, we're gonna take it in as a scalar.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that makes sense.
Unless we want, and that's a fair question, right? Do we want the caller to have to specify a list of address spaces, or do we want to make it simple for them?
Yep.
Depends on what you're doing. It's not a terrible refactor to change things later, because a refactor that doesn't change the generated resources, that only changes the Terraform structure, doesn't actually cause any deltas to get deployed, right? So if the end result is the ID names of your Terraform resources and their attribute values are all the same at the end of the day, nothing gets applied, because ultimately all the middle stuff is just ceremony for getting to that state. And I think you dropped the word VNet on it. It's just address space.
Well, before I had VNet on it, which is interesting. So.
Yeah. Though, to be fair, before it wasn't inside of a VNet module. So I think there's more of an argument for it there. Because now you're inside of a VNet module, and so there's a little bit more context, I would say, than just sitting at the root of the directory. Because before it was a local effectively at the root of 201. And there it's like, well, you probably want more than just address space.
So now, because it's a variable instead of local, that's going to force us, right, to have to put that in, or else.
Well, you want to take off the default if you want to make it required.
So that would be required. So there's a little bit of a trade-off here. We definitely want it to be required, but then also someone coming behind us might have a little bit of trouble trying to figure out what they need to put there, but that's okay.
Yeah, and that is effectively the trade-off there, right? So
yeah,
and ultimately you end up doing it with your description to try and make it as intuitive as possible. So yeah, so this becomes, rather than local, change that to var.address space, and that works. And so this is going to make a little bit of an assumption that the address space that somebody passes in, that Cider subnet function is going to give you a reasonable range, right? Like there's Cider ranges you could pass where if you try to increment the net number by 8, not going to work, right? So
I'm going to actually change this back to be VNet underscore address space because it's buggy. There's a delta between the 301 and the 201 because we did VNet underscore space in the
that's fair
other one. So I'm just going to do this just so that it
try to keep it consistent across each of them.
I already committed the other thing. I don't want to
go back and change it.
Go back and change the commit. So right, so now it matches.
Yep.
Okay, Cool.
So
So
now,
what's going to happen now is we got to go back to the module because we need to pass that. See, it's
yep.
broken
So
on
now
us
you got to
again.
give a VNet address space to both of them.
Yep. So central, we'll stick with our 172.0.0/16. And then over here, again, missing that.
So I mean, you could do a 172.16. Well,
Let's make it more simple for the. In the sample, this is very clear that that's two dramatically different networks. You know what I mean?
that is true. I'm just trying to think of what the Cider subnet function is going to return for that.
Oh, that's true.
Because remember, we're doing 8.1 on both of them, which is why I was going to keep it both in.
Yeah, let's keep it. Well, let's do this. Later, we'll do this. You can do that.
Yeah, and I would keep it with the /16 for that reason.
That works. We can do this. That works. Yeah, you're right. Because the Cider function would return something different. So we would have to provide a way to deal with that, right? So more locals or more variables or more something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is easy. It will populate.
Yeah, and ultimately the decision on what to do there really depends on what you're building, right? Like your VNet module, like your modules should be as specific as you can make them for what you're building. Because if your modules just expose up the exact same variables as the Terraform resources themselves, you haven't gained much. Like they should provide some semblance of convenience for whatever you're making.
Exactly. All right, so let's run another plan. See what we get. So we're looking for 2 resource groups in 2 regions, 2 VNets in 2 regions that reference the right regions, and then they have the correct Cider ranges and stuff. So plans get a little long now. Cool.
Yeah, we're actually starting to like build out a bunch of stuff.
So central US, that's good. Yep. East US 2, East US 2.
Yeah.
Okay, that works. So in central US,
subnets.
We've got the 01, the 20, central US. Okay, that looks good.
Yeah.
And then, okay, this is looking healthy. So we've got East US and East US VNet. We've got one Cider range. 10.1, 10.1. This looks good.
Yeah, apply.
I think I destroyed before, didn't I? I think I did.
I think you did.
All right. So it looks like we're going to be able to close our VNet stories today, which is pretty cool. See what we had here. Yeah, it's gone. So yeah, it's gone. So it should be creating now.
Yeah.
All right. So we're getting
walk through, and then I think that wraps up our 301 story, unless there's more complex stuff we want to do with it. But I think that accurately shows off. It adds in one more concept of effectively bringing multiple modules together. Look at that.
Which is good, right? That's good. The one thing that we're going to have to probably talk about, and maybe we can do it before we do the next stream, is are we going to continue with this multi-modules thing?
Yeah, because we're going to quickly start building up more and more stuff.
Yeah, it almost feels like maybe we should move this module folder out of the numbers, and but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe if we had if we moved it someplace else, then we would the modules folder would be referenceable, right?
Yeah, or at least obviously referenceable.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to talk about that. We'll do that offline. Try to decide what to do, because it feels like what we see here should grow, not be copy pasta for every one of these samples, right? Like where this says templates, I almost feel like we should have, and maybe it's here, we should have a modules folder.
Yeah, that could work. That way there's an easy way to reach up and grab it. The only thing that gets weird is we'll have to think about what does the API of those modules, what should it look like, right?
Yeah.
The advantage here is each of these, 101, 201, 301 are very much self-contained things. work through.
Yeah, I guess the modules could, we might have to do something to one of the modules like we just did in the sample, right? Where we had to change that RG module for it to work properly for us here.
Right. And so that's the only thing that gives me a little pause is we might have desired API differences between them.
Yeah.
Maybe. It feels like one of those things that once we get to the end, it's probably easier of a refactor at the end once we know the final result.
Yep. Here's our central VNet, our east VNet.
Look at that. We are networking
Cool.
gurus. It's almost like we know what we're doing.
Well, you do. I'm just along for the ride, right? Okay. Well, cool. Well, that's pretty awesome. I feel like bam, bam, bam. Look, I will go and do a PR, I think, probably for this stuff now.
Cool.
They're in resolve because I haven't PR'd them. That's why they're in resolve. We'll move them to close once a PR. But that's pretty much probably all I'm up for today. I don't know about you. We probably have work to do somewhere else, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got work stuff coming, so I'm probably going to sign off here pretty quick and bounce, but
cool.
Sweet,
well,
Dan.
Hey, another Terraform stream
No,
in the
another
books.
one down.
We've done 2. Who knows how many more we have? But Lord knows we have quite a few more stories to write. And I guess they're gonna have to move to the next sprint. Ugh, I feel like a PO or something. This is getting gross. Oh well, I'll figure that out too.
Cool.
Because that took a couple hours. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I
Sounds
appreciate
good.
it.
Thank you,
It's been a
everybody, for
blast.
tuning in. We will
Later.
see you next time. I think the next one's scheduled for tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken.
So. Oh, I was going to talk to you about that. I might have a conflict for that. We might have to move that.
Okay, so future stream will be forthcoming. Watch our Twitters.
Sorry about that.
There will be notifications.
I had a meeting that came up, but maybe we could do it, but just not as long. So we'll figure that out.
Yeah, we will discuss. Watch the Twitters for updates. So with that, I will say happy coding. We'll see everyone next time.
Later.